In the 1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. But we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higher Side Chats.
How the hell are we doing, Higher Side Chatters? It's a beautiful day to drink a little drink, a perfect time to smoke a little smoke. I am your humble host, Greg Carlwood, from the mean streets of sunny San Diego, and today we're wading through a raging river of lies perpetrated by NASA, the global elite, religious institutions, and God knows who else about the moon, Saturn, spaceships, Jesus, and the goddamn Chupacabra. But before we dive in, I want to tell you people about the new Conspiracy HQ that's launching July 1st. Freeman Fly, Frater X, Rob Davin, Mark Howard, and myself have decided to join forces because it really takes a team to have a fully operational website these days with news, articles, of course, videos and podcasts. So it should be great stuff. I love all those guys. They're talented dudes. I'm surprised they'd want me in that group of heavy hitters, but hey, I'll take it. Because when I look at a really successful full-bodied website or groups like the Young Turks or InfoWars, there really are whole teams working together on those things, and we want to do the same kind of thing for our kind of conspiracy people. So look out for that July 1st, conspiracyhq.com. Also, this money bomb has brought in $1,600 so far, which is $800 for me and $800 for the listener. And I hope this is okay with everyone. I hate to change the rules in the middle of the game, but I want to spread the love out. So a new rule for the money bomb is that when it goes over $1,000 total, or $500 for me, $500 for the listener, I'm going to split it up between two people, so $250 and $250. So right now we have a situation where on June 24th, I will pick two Money Bomb winners, and I will be giving each of them at least $400. So if we want to boost those numbers and help out the show, please hop over to thehighersidechats.com/donate and throw in $5 or so, and we'll see what happens in just a few days. Thanks so much. This is the biggest Money Bomb yet. I'm going to skip the usual spots for the sake of getting down to brass tacks with the man himself, Robert Morningstar. Enjoy it, people. Okay, people, we know by now that the world is far stranger than the shadowy elite like to make it seem, and when you start looking at stories of ET contact, alien races, abductions, UFO crashes, and the reverse engineering of these crafts, the strange anomalous structures and satellite imagery on both the moon and Mars, and the tens of thousands of anecdotal stories, it's easy to start feeling like you're the odd man out at a boring 9-to-5 reality when a world that sounds like something out of Star Trek exists just beyond your reach. Believe me, folks, I've known the feeling. And with the secret space program and Breakaway Civilization conference just around the bend on June 28th and 29th in San Mateo, California, what better way to explore the hidden reality than by talking it out with Robert Morningstar, who is a legend in the field and a guy who I would consider one of the most compelling speakers on an already packed panel of powerhouses. Robert has studied the paranormal and UFOs for over 40 years and has published many research articles online exposing government cover-ups and deception in the JFK assassination. He's also written extensively to expose NASA's use of disinformation technology in suppressing evidence of extraterrestrial life and exposing the real nature and threat of the UFO phenomenon, and he is also the associate editor of the famed UFO Digest. You know him, you love him. Robert Morningstar, welcome to THC.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for doing this on such short notice, so close to the big conference. I mean, I've been listening to you talk about these subjects for years, man, and I'm always intrigued, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your presentation if I can get away from my booth for a little while. And I don't want to step all over your presentation material, but can you give us an idea of what you'll be focusing on this time? I think the moon's a big part of it, right?
The moon is a big part of it. I'm going to take the audience on a journey to Mars and then back to the moon. And then when we come back to Earth, I expect that everyone's going to have a totally new consciousness. That's my goal. My goal, when I was invited and I heard the name of the event, the idea of the Breakaway Civilization, my instant reaction, my first phrase to myself was, to have a breakaway civilization, you have to have a breakaway consciousness. Mm-hmm. And I proposed that to Jeroen van Straten and Henrik Palmgren, who are the organizers, and they liked the idea. And this is the thing that we need to expand our consciousness in order to comprehend the magnitude of what awaits us, both on Mars and on the other side of the moon. And what awaits us is a presence that has been there, I believe, since what we would say time immemorial. An intelligence that has been interacting with mankind, or intelligences. There's several. And some are pro-human and some are anti-human. And that's my concern, that there is not a clear distinction as to who the players are on this very high level of contention for the resources and lives on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So that'll be a trip to Mars. We're going to explore the Dingo Gap, Martian junkyard. And I expect to show some remarkable work from some of my teammates. Teammates are people who have been in contact with me for a while, or a long while or a short while, but who see eye to eye with me and who see with the same kind of vision, which is, I like to say that God gifted me with two great things, 20/20 vision and a 20/20 tongue, which means I see what I see and I say what I see, and that's the way. And if I'm wrong, I welcome corrections. Course corrections are very important. To be wrong on a couple of things is not a failure. To be wrong, be shown you're wrong, and stay wrong, that's a failure. And sometimes I like to, people think that if you get one thing wrong, you're totally discredited. I'd like to remind people about school. When you
Yeah.
tests, if you got from 100 to 90, you still had an A, even though you got, 9 questions wrong. And then you worked your way down. It's not a total loss to be wrong about some elements.
Right.
But to be self-deluded, to accept falsehood as truth, as our fellow citizens have for 50 years, since the time of the assassination of President Kennedy, who was and remains very dear to me, my mentor, you might say, my spiritual guide. So I want to break that mind control apparatus by showing people what has been hidden from us for 50 years in the JFK assassination, for 42 years with regard to the Apollo photographs.
Oh yeah, I think it's gonna be great, man. I mean, and you're right. It's super tough to be 100% accurate when you're dealing with this level of deception. It's a process. It's hazy, but I think you do a great job, man.
Thank you.
No problem, man. In terms of the moon, I think it is so interesting because I hear these stories about what might be on the far side of the moon and where the moon might have come from. And you have all these airbrushed NASA photos.
Right.
And some researchers go so far as to say that it's a hollow artificial space station. Right. And that seems really far out. But I wish I could just get up there and see for myself because you can't trust anything anymore.
I agree. I unwittingly went along believing everything that NASA puts up on its pages. And in recent months, I've had a lot of contention. I have a troll, and I have a couple of these trolls and gremlins that follow me around on my internet site, on Facebook, and they try to sabotage my work and throw monkey wrenches into it. But unwittingly, in trying to prove me wrong, these same people have sent me links to say, see, you're wrong, ha, ha, ha. And I opened up the link, and guess what? The links they sent me led me to the discoveries that I'm going to be exposing or showing. And you know what? Debate is important. Harassment is not fun. But when somebody starts to harass you and bully you, because that's what it is. It's internet harassment and bullying. And when people get together in groups, it is a crime, and it's called predatory gang stalking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very up on this because it's happened for so many years. People didn't have a word to wrap their heads around or label what was being done to them. But the term is predatory gang stalking. And it's become a modus operandi, a standard operating procedure in government, in bureaucracies, in corporations, and just in general society. Flash mobbing is a form of predatory gang stalking, where a group of people will say, hey, we're going to hit that store, everybody show up, or, we're going to ransack this, like they do it to Marts,
Mm-hmm.
Target, and all those places. Anyway, that is a sample of it, and it happens to all of us. So be aware, folks, and you do have recourse. You can go to the FBI and tell them, listen, somebody's really harassing me and messing with my email. And I've done that, actually. I have had good contacts with the FBI. Everybody thinks they're boogeymen, but they really are good, upright, outstanding men. And the ones that were involved in the Kennedy assassination were under great duress. And I say to the FBI, I thank you very much for all the work you do and all the work you've done to save my life a couple of times. We can get into that. The FBI helped me when I had a very serious problem flying in a single-engine aircraft over Kennedy Airport, of all places, where all of my electrical systems went out.
Wow.
Radio, navigation, landing gear. Fortunately, the airplanes are set up to keep running, even when the electricity, because they have magnetos, so they keep running. But everything else was shot, and I made it back to the airport thinking that I was going to have to make a landing on the grass because the retractable landing gear was up, and when I pushed the switch to get it down, it wasn't locking in. You're supposed to get 3 green lights when your nose gear and your wing gear is locked in place, and they were just swinging. And I said, oh my God, I think I want to have this one on the grass so I don't destroy the airplane. But fortunately, I found out that the FBI had followed my plane all the way to the airport and had warned the airport that I was in trouble. So when I got close to the airport, I heard a voice to say, Piper Arrow, so-and-so, if you're the airplane with trouble, click your mic twice. You're clear to land on runway 22. It was the nicest thing I've ever heard.
Wow, yeah.
And I was able to make it back. So I found out that it was the FBI on my tail that helped me get back. Fortunately, just before I landed, the landing gear locked into place, because in slowing down the plane from 140 knots to the landing speed, which was 76, the wind abated somehow, and we got a little tap on a grounding wire, which was the problem, and I was able to get the gear down.
Wow, man. You lead an interesting life, an interesting wild life. And
I have.
Man, you got lucky there. But so I wanted to ask you a little bit about kind of the hidden history of the solar system, because I hear this talked about more and more, and it's fascinating stuff. I mean, a lot of researchers, you talked about the maybe different ET groups that have been here for a long time, and there are researchers that kind of speculate that humanity may have come from somewhere else, like even Mars. And maybe
yes, I agree.
You do.
I agree completely. Yes, I do.
Do you think that some races are indigenous to Mars and some were indigenous to Earth?
Yes, I do believe that. I believe that there was a parallel evolution, not only on Mars and Earth, but on the moon and some of the moons of Saturn. You asked me earlier, I think it was you who mentioned about the sun, that Saturn was once a sun.
Yes.
Yes. There is, the world's foremost, or one of the world's foremost experts in gravitational physics is Dr. Ed Belbruno of Princeton University. And he wrote a book called Fly Me to the Moon. And when he released it, I went to hear him speak, and there were copies of his book around, and I did a review of it. But when I opened up his book, the first page that I opened to stated that in the early history of the solar system, Saturn was a sun. That Saturn was a sun, and we were a binary star system, and that it died down. It didn't really, it started up, but it didn't jumpstart to the full fusion stage, and it died down. Another theory is that Jupiter, I've heard that we were once a triple sun system in the very early, the really hot period of the evolution of the solar system, that Saturn, Jupiter, and our sun, Sol, where we comprise a 3-sun system. If that is true, then you can see that Jupiter and Saturn would have been mini solar systems, with little
Right.
minor, they would have been minor stars and to our major star, the sun. And as I say, God only knows what he could cook up in that primordial soup with 12 moons on Jupiter and 11 moons on Saturn. One interesting thing about Saturn that I will share with you now. In 1949, Project Sign, which became Project Grudge, which became Project Blue Book, was concerned with the UFO problem and the problem of these giant motherships that had been observed taking positions in equatorial orbits around the Earth. And from these motherships, the scout ships were descending, scout ships being the smaller crafts like the ones that crashed at Roswell, the ones, plural. There were two UFOs that crashed at Roswell. And one landed in the Foster Ranch, and the other one landed in the plains of St. Augustine. A great book has been written by Arthur Campbell regarding the recovery of artifacts from the plains of St. Augustine. And I recommend that to everyone. It's the most profound and thoroughly scientific book that I believe I've ever read or seen on the Roswell crash. And they found pieces of high-density polyethylene, which, along with certain metal fragments, which seem to have components of otherworldly molecules. So I recommend the UFO crash on the plains of St. Augustine, or Augustine, by Arthur H. Campbell. So this Project Sign memo that I read is part of those Majestic 12 documents that you can find in Dr. Robert Wood's website. Majestic 12, I believe, is the website, majestic.com or org. Either way, the statement was this, that the United States government, the United States Air Force, Department of Defense, had enlisted the top astronomers and the top astronomical observatories, to try to track the UFOs to see where these fleets of UFOs were coming from. And they did so. And they reported back to the United States Department of Defense that they had tracked these fleets, the motherships, through their powerful telescopes, and that they found that they were originating, coming from and going back to the moon Titan.
Wow.
Saturn's moon Titan.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation about Titan having vast oceans. That's pretty interesting.
Vast oceans of methane. Methane.
Even weirder.
Weirder. Titan looks more like planet Earth, topographically speaking, than any other of the moons or planets that we've explored. And it has terrain and mountain ranges and continents, but the oceans are made of liquid methane, which I believe is something like 167 degrees below zero. And of course, we believe that no life can exist in such climes. But about 3 years ago, a few NASA scientists came out and said that they had found a special form of life in Mono Lake, California, which was based on arsenic. It was a cell or a culture that reproduced itself, and its metabolism and its life cycle was based not on carbon, but on arsenic, of all things.
I do remember seeing that. Yeah, very odd.
Well, this and the premise of this revelation was, her name was Dr. Wolf, and she had hyphenated names, but I don't remember Dr. Wolf or Wolfson. But she said a very interesting thing. She said the important thing about their finding was that the search for life, as we have conducted it for the last 40 years, life on Mars, life on the moon, life anywhere, has been conducted through too narrow a window. We've been looking only for carbon-based life. And this showed that there is another form of life that was based on arsenic. And then she made the most amazing statement. She said, now this life form cannot thrive on Earth because the temperature is too hot. needs all of its energy just to maintain its steady state. So it cannot expand, propagate, reproduce. It just has to keep accumulating the arsenic to maintain its steady state existence. However, on another planet where the temperature was much colder than Earth's, and she then said, perhaps on some place like Saturn's moon Titan, where the temperature is 167 below zero, it might be possible for such an organism to thrive and propagate.
Wow.
That was an earth-shattering statement. And really the important thing was pointing out that perhaps the paradigm is wrong, that our assumption that all life, any life, must be based on the carbon is a fallacy. It's an erroneous assumption. So they called for reviewing all the previous work that we've done and to start expanding, opening the window a little wider in order to see whether or not we missed something. With regard to this, I'd like to say that there's a Dr. Levin who was in charge of the Mars Viking Life Research Project, and they claim to have found life in back in 1976 when Viking landed. They did an experiment, and the experiment was to scoop up some dirt and to drop in some nutrients that had a little bit radioactivity in it. And the premise was that if there were any microbial activity in the soil, that it would eat the nutrient and exude gases that could be picked up because they were radioactive. Indeed, they did.
Huh.
And an announcement was made that there was life on Mars. Then NASA quashed that finding and said that the experiment was wrong and that they did another experiment that proved it was wrong. Well, the experiment that they did was a different experiment, and it was intentionally conducted to kill any life that was in the soil. I was watching Dr. Levin on a show on the Science Channel, or Science Channel, I think it was, and it was called NASA Secret UFO Files. And he said that what they had done is they had taken soil and cooked it, and then tested that soil for life. And he said, how can you find any life in soil that has been heated in such a way that it would kill any microbial life?
Yeah.
What he had done, he's taken fresh soil, poured the nutrient in, and up came the gases. Because, a lot of people don't know that bacteria poop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's this term that the scientists cooked up for ALH 84,001, the meteorite down in Antarctica, which also showed life forms and microbes in it. And they said it had been alive because they found PAHs, PAHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a fart.
Yeah.
a bacteria fart.
Wow.
So anyway, the polyaromatic hydrocarbons were found in the specimen that came from Antarctica, and I think it was Dr. McKay came out and he announced that this was a sign of life on Mars. And even President Clinton came out and said, "Oh, we have great news. They found signs of life on Mars." But each time that these findings have been brought forth, they have been backtracked and quashed by NASA. And this decision was made a year before we took off for the moon. In 1967, a decision was made officially at the highest levels of NASA and the highest levels of government that if we should ever find any evidence of life, previous life, present life, previous civilizations, higher intelligence civilization, that the world should not be told because it would just be too disruptive to the social, economic, and political fabric of the planet.
That's so weird, and I think that's such a fallacy. I don't think that's necessarily true. But I wanted to get back to, or just touch on the Saturn and Jupiter Sun thing again, because this opens up a huge window for me because I have a few shows coming up where guests are going to be talking about the elite or the Illuminati, whichever name you want to put on it, and their worship of Saturn and Jupiter. They have these cults that worship Saturn and Jupiter, and that adds a really interesting layer. And to hear that the UFOs might have been coming from one of Saturn's moons, I mean, maybe this is the big secret that these elite are alluding to in all their symbolism and all their worship.
We're talking about a solar system war. I won't call it galactic because they're not from other stars. I don't believe, you see, I believe this story about them being interstellar travelers. Yeah, you know, there might be that, but it's really not necessary. I've always said I believe the Greys are local yokels, parallel evolution, maybe some kind of silicon-based life that evolved on Titan or some other planet. But what I was going to say, the legends tell us what happened. Mythology is not something that's not true. Mythology is something that contains an essential truth to be transferred in the simplest form possible so that the truth is maintained or the fact is maintained. And what we're talking about is the war between the Olympians and the Titans. The Olympians being the people from Jupiter and the Titans being the ones from Saturn.
Wow.
That's what I believe we're dealing with. A war that occurred, perhaps also involving Mars. I know that Mars was destroyed by a cataclysm of such incredible proportions that when I saw the after effects, I felt fear and dread in the pit of my stomach. It's interesting that your logo here, the Higher Side Chat, has the microphone with an eye looking over it. Well, the eye of Mars is a phenomenon that's been seen for over 100 years. Percival Lowell wrote about it, and nobody could explain what it was. But in 2003, I got to see Mars at its closest approach to planet Earth in 60,000 years through a very high-level telescope, 128x super Plaza lens, which made Mars look 128 times closer than it was at its closest point in 60,000 years. Man. Make a long story short, let me just describe it this way. What I saw through the telescope would be like you going out any night if there's a full moon, looking at the full moon, which is 250,000 miles away. Okay, so 38,000 miles divided by 128 comes to about 271,000 miles. Mars is twice as big as the moon. So I saw through the telescope something that you might imagine if you went out and looked at the full moon one night, that's 250,000 miles away. Imagine another object in the sky that was only 20,000 miles farther away, but twice as big as the moon.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how big I saw Mars. And when I saw it in one eyeball full of light and darkness that Mars was destroyed overnight. Its ecosystem was utterly devastated by asteroid impacts. And the asteroid impact that I'm talking about cracked the planet, created the Valles Marineris, that trench like Grand Canyon from San Diego to New York, 4 times deeper, 18 miles wide, as well as creating an uprise of mountains or highlands called the Tarsus Bulge. So when I saw this, I realized, oh my God, in one night, like the story of Atlantis, you know, Mars may be a primordial recollection of Atlantis, or it's a cycle that civilizations rise and fall both on continents and planets, and they are destroyed by natural events. Be that as it may, whichever it is, I saw these things. I saw the Hellas Basin still steaming. It seemed to me that one really frightened me. I saw that one the night before I saw the Eye of Mars. And that is steaming. I saw vapors rising out of the Hellas Basin, which is about 600. It's an elliptical impact crater, asteroid impact crater, that's 600 miles on the long axis of the oval. And it looked like it was full of vapor, and it was fuming and smoking, and it looked to me like it had just hit. Another frightening thought. And I could see rainbows glimmering over the surface of this fluid or this vapors. I could see the edges rising and falling like water does at the side of the ocean when waves are coming or the tide is going and coming. And I could see the striations of the well, the basin itself, and it looked like what we see in the Grand Canyon. I mean, I think that people who gravitate to the Southwest, the Grand Canyon, Arizona, Utah, may have a lot of Martian genes in them, and they like to be close to places that look like home. You know?
Wow, yeah.
That's my intuition about why people settle where they do. So this destruction of Mars by this cataclysm was just self-evident. And then a couple of years later, Mission to Mars came with Gary Sinise and Tom Robbins and those. It's a really fine film, but everything I've told you is depicted at the end of that movie, which was made with NASA's cooperation. And when you see the end of the movie, when they walk into the face on Mars and walk into the room that has the hologram of the solar system, everything I've just told you will be depicted. As a matter of fact, the asteroid impact that I've described that created the eye of Mars in the region called Solis Lacus, that asteroid goes right under Gary Sinise's armpit, and it's blown up, and the rendering is fantastic.
It's weird how that type of disclosure happens in Hollywood films.
Well, it's not weird. It's planned. They have to prepare us. And let me tell you, in 1965, I was watching a program here in New York called The Alan Burke Show. This was a very intellectual fellow who used to sit for an hour with amazing guests each Saturday night. And one night he had Frank Edwards on discussing Flying Saucers Serious Business. That's the name of his title of his book. But the title of the book he did not make up. The title comes from a statement made by Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkotter, the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who in February of 1960 made a public announcement that the Air Force was hiding the reality of UFOs and flying saucers. And he said that the Air Force was secretly harassing airmen and Air Force personnel to keep their mouths shut, forbidding them to talk, threatening them with legal action and punishment if they should divulge that UFOs are real. And the phrase that Admiral Hillenkotter used was, in the United States Air Force, flying saucers are serious business. So Frank Edwards dropped the R. He just called it flying saucers serious business. But on this program, he spoke at length about the need to prepare the public for contact. And he said that the CIA was well aware of the extraterrestrial presence and flying saucers, but that they felt that revealing it to the public in 1960, about 1960 to 65, which was just 20 to 25 years after the War of the Worlds panic that occurred when Orson Welles did his show, that the government was very concerned that it might create a social upheaval, loss of faith, collapse of religions, economic hardships, and that it would depress the scientists, the engineers, and the doctors so badly that they might not even get up to go to work the next morning. I'll talk about that paper a bit later. But the more important point was this. Frank Edwards said that the CIA had a plan of 7 cycles of 7 years, 7 times 7, 49 years, and that within these 7 cycles of 7 years, the public would be slowly acclimated to accept the extraterrestrial presence as real and persuaded that it is not hostile and that they were not really the evil monsters from outer space that were the typical depiction of aliens in the 1950s. It was the Thing. It came from outer space, the crawling eye. I married a monster from outer space. Everything was really hostile and lethal and evil. He said that slowly, especially during the 70s, a new kind of extraterrestrial would be presented to us that would be less frightening. And slowly the public, he said, you are going to see films like you have never seen before. You're going to see films with technology and special effects that you can't even imagine now. And then when Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out in 1977, which was 12 years after this conversation, I said, this is what Frank Edwards was talking about. The Starfleet, Darth Vader. Why do you think they have a Wookiee in Star Wars? Bigfoot hangs around with flying saucers. There are a lot of UFO events that are contemporaneous with Bigfoot sightings around the world.
Yeah.
So it is a serious issue. And then, as I said, in 1967, NASA commissioned the Brookings Institution, a think tank like the Rand Corporation, to come up with a plan for the peaceful uses of outer space. That's what the chapter is called, On the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And in it, they deal with the subject of whether or not to reveal to the public if we were to find life on the moon, or signs of life, previous life, or advanced civilizations that died away, whether or not we should tell the public. And the Brookings Institution said, no, you should not tell the public, as I said, because it would be too disruptive. And they emphasized religion above all other things, that religions would become destabilized, belief systems would be compromised. And I don't know why they did this.
I think it's one of their control mechanisms. So if one of their control mechanisms goes away, they're going to be upset. Sure. So they want to preserve that. But I don't think they generally care about the fragile minds of the religious people. I think they just want to keep their control institution intact.
Right. Well, I say this, that religion, regardless of what you believe in, it is the glue that holds societies together.
It's also the cause for a lot of war, though.
Exactly. Sure. But you know what I was going to say? I don't know why they picked on the Buddhists. They said that the Buddhist religion would be upset and destabilized by the revelation of alien civilizations or extraterrestrial life. And I said, that's a lot of malarkey.
Yeah.
Because the Buddhists have so many gods, so many demons, devils, angels, all asaras, all kinds of creatures in their hierarchy, from the microbe and the bug to the Godhead. I don't think the Buddhists would have any trouble dealing with extraterrestrials. As a matter of fact, I believe that Buddhism and Islam and Christianity Judaism were all started by extraterrestrial influences.
Yeah, they're in there in the early days. And
I think the burning bush was a landed UFO.
that could make sense. That's interesting. A lot of people also think it's a psychedelic trip. But
yes.
It's definitely layered in symbolism, and who knows what the real core story really was.
It's interesting you should say that because, if you study the religious texts, very often the visionaries who see God or the angel Gabriel or the Lord, they see the Lord in the Old Testament, they see the Christ in the New Testament. There's always an eating of something. For example, Daniel is told to take up this scroll and eat it. And then in the book of the Revelations, St. John is told to take the book and eat it. And that'll be bitter in his mouth and sweet in his stomach, or vice versa. But there's always ingestion. And there's a remarkable book written on this subject. It's called Sacred Mushroom and the Cross by John Allegro.
Yes.
John Allegro is one of the foremost scholars on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he translated the Copper Scroll and I believe the War Scroll. But way back in the 70s, he wrote a book positing that Jesus Christ, initiated his disciples with the sacred mushroom, and that many of the titles that Jesus assumes and that are traditional in the Bible, like Son of Man, Son of God, are really allusions to the name of the sacred mushroom in the Middle East, which is called the flesh of God. I recommend that book to everyone. I think it's that has really got great insight. And since I've mentioned John Allegro and the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'd like to point out that in the scroll called the Chariots of Glory, it explicitly states that the angels of the Lord were coming and going to the encampment at Qumran, riding on chariots of glory. It furthermore states that in the center of the Qumran encampment, there was a tabernacle, which was a tent, in which the angels would have intercourse with the women. And there are very, very strict hygienic rules and protocols, one of which was dealing with the purification ritual should any of the women receive angel seed on their arms or their legs, that it had to be cleaned completely and purified. So apparently there was a lot of sexual intercourse going on between these angels and Qumran women.
Yeah, there was.
Which leads us to the conception of Jesus. Now
Yeah,
I'd like
could
to
be.
all right, well, listen, we know a lot of people confuse two concepts in Christianity: Immaculate Conception and virgin birth. And they confuse the two. I'd like to clarify something theologically speaking, according to the Christian dogma. Immaculate Conception does not refer to Jesus's conception without sexual intercourse. Immaculate Conception refers to the conception of Mary's soul as the purest vessel, held since the beginning of time by the Godhead in secret, in perfect and sacred place, where her soul could not be contaminated, because she would be the repository, or the one who would bring the Messiah to earth. Virgin birth, this is what we today would call artificial insemination. So the inference is that Mary was preserved from the beginning of time to be the purest vessel to conceive the Christ, but the Christ himself was conceived without sexual intercourse, and so we would call it artificial insemination. An interesting symbol is to be found in the Quran. The Quran tells the story of Jesus' conception and the coming of the angel Gabriel, and parallels the Christian, except it makes one statement that the Christian Bible does not. It says that Mary conceived because the angel Gabriel blew the word of God with a trumpet into her ear.
Strange.
Somewhat, unless you understand symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
If you took two ears and put them together, let's just say, two severed ears, and you put them earlobe to earlobe, what would you get?
I guess it would look like a vagina, and then you got a trumpet.
Exactly so. And now it says that the angel Gabriel used a trumpet to blow the word of God into Mary's ear. So I think that's a pretty explicit description of an artificial insemination procedure.
Yeah, I could see that. I definitely could. It's an interesting take on that stuff.
Well, you see, we have to study a lot of different things,
Absolutely.
To get the holographic image. If you read only one religious text and accept it as the be-all and end-all, it's kind of like seeing one flat side, like a photograph.
Yeah.
But you read many, or scores, or hundreds, and you start to see from all these different angles, then you get what I would call a hologram. You can walk around the subject, look under and above it, and see with depth into it. Mm-hmm. So I think all of us are part of this mystery, and all of us contain that same seed.
Yeah.
People are really in shock these days, and science doesn't know what to do really with this very, very delicate subject of the newest findings in DNA research and the discovery that Neanderthal man was not human. Okay?
Yeah.
If you look at the tree, the Darwinian tree of evolution, It started with, the proto-hominid and then Homo erectus and then the human. And they believe that the human came down and branched off into, Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, and that they lived cohabitated, and then Cro-Magnon wiped out Neanderthal. Well, the most recent DNA studies show that Neanderthal was not human. It came down along a different evolutionary pathway. And then Neanderthal crossed with the proto-hominid as it existed in North Africa and in Siberia, and that crossing is what created the Caucasian race. And so Africans do not have this Neanderthal gene, and all Caucasians do.
Interesting. There's so much fascinating stuff about bloodlines and about the history of these different species that you say some might have even originated off the planet Earth. And we got about 10 minutes left. I kind of did want to get to some of those alien races if we could.
Okay.
Well, because you mentioned the Olympians versus the Titans, and that's fascinating to me. I mean, do you think those are the Greys and the Nordics?
I would think so. I would think that we can't even imagine, what it really was. This is talking about spiritual warfare, yet it demonstrates and describes tremendous technological power. As a matter of fact, before Homer, the Theogony was written by Hesiod. Hesiod's Theogony is the origins of the gods. And you will never, ever read a more explicit description of an atomic bomb than the point at which Hesiod describes Zeus destroying the Titans with his thunderbolt, his lightning bolt. You read that passage and you are reading a description of Hiroshima.
Right.
Which brings me to another subject. Since we do have such a short time left, I want to bring it back to the Moon project that I'm going to present at San Mateo at the secret space program Breakaway Civilization conference. I'm going to be showing photographs taken by the Apollo astronauts from 68 to 72, showing what is really on the moon, that there are towers, as has been described in rumor and story since the 1970s when I first heard about it. I released a photo to you of a tower that I've named Big Ben.
Yeah, it's crazy looking.
It's out of this world, literally. And then there is a constellation of space stations that has been orbiting and parked on the far side of the moon since at least the 1960s. And I will be presenting photographs of this constellation of space stations, which were seen and photographed by the astronauts. I sent you another photograph that I dubbed the Moon Racer. I sent you two frames. This is one of the most amazing pieces of film that I have ever seen, and I recently discovered it. And what it was is that one of the astronauts, the astronauts were all really high-tech military men and fighter pilots and what I call guys with fast eyes. So one of the astronauts on Apollo 16 saw this thing coming, and he jumped to the window with his camera ready, and he tracked this thing across the moon. And the way I saw it, I could not believe it. It looked to me like Wonder Woman's airplane. Remember Wonder Woman had this invisible airplane, like glass? It had a glass airplane. I know. Maybe you're too young for Wonder Woman. I know. But she had a sort of transparent or translucent airplane that would be camouflaged by its see-through appearance. Well, I see this thing racing across the moon, and this astronaut, my God, what an eye. And what coordination, because he got this thing perfectly centered in the camera, swooping over the surface of the moon and then rising up past the horizon of the moon into outer space. And for 3 frames, they allowed us to see it. Who is they? They is a good NASA guy who was told, listen, cut this thing out of the film. We can't let the public see this. So what he did is he left the parts in which it is most difficult to discern this spacecraft that I call the Moon Racer. But he did leave 2.5. I said 3 frames, 2.5 frames intact, where we could see the craft crossing the horizon and then fully out of the horizon in outer space. And the third frame shows a cut. And it's literal. It's like a razor cut through the film where it's joined. This film was not supposed to have any kind of cuts because it's supposed to be the intact onboard camera.
Yeah,
But
I'm looking at that photo now. It's pretty crazy, and people will be able to see that if you go to the episode where we're talking. If you go to the actual website where I post it on the page, I will also include these photos. But yeah, they definitely make you wonder what's out there.
It's a beautiful craft. I've never seen anything as beautiful, as streamlined, as aerodynamic, aerospatially dynamic as that thing. And there is no reactive propulsion. This thing is really moving like a magnetic bullet. And as I see it, I can see how the technology of this craft would involve magnetic fields and, different polarities on the wings or the nose and the tail. It's a really fantastic craft. So that's one of them. The third, I want to point out that this film, the Lunar Rover, went rambling around in the region of the crater Descartes. And one of the things that really has always bothered me about the Apollo 16 landing and the Apollo 14 landing is that when you see the landing sites from the lunar orbiter photos, it is surrounded by high rising craggy mountains, peaks, partially collapsed domes, and all kinds of structures. And yet when you see the photos taken from the surface, it looks like flatland, Mm-hmm. And it turns out that NASA has had a very bad habit of erasing all the background stars. They blacken out the sky, they put in artificial horizons. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, in the Apollo 16, 17 photos that I'm analyzing, some of the stars were not erased. But in the 2 photos of the rover, I say one of them is UFO rising, lunar rover, UFO rising, and then another one says UFO rover, the true horizon or the real horizon. Because I conducted an enhancement on this one frame where I found a UFO, looks like a missile being launched. And then when I improved the quality, you could see it's really cylindrical and luminous. And then I did one more operation, which is called equalization. Equalization, the computer finds areas that are really close to each other in their color. For example, all the whites of a certain color, all the grays of a certain, all the blues of a certain hue will be joined. So the third photo, or the fourth photo there of the Apollo 16 shows the real contour of the terrain. You can see those craggy mountains that I was talking about appearing in the background. And I thought that UFO was passing by the moon, going on the other side of the horizon and falling past the moon or being shot in space.
Right.
But that photo shows that this thing was rising from the land of the moon, the terrain of the moon, because you see the mountain range behind it.
Uh-huh.
There's a black outline. Looks almost like a dinosaur's back. It's so craggy that I'm convinced that there are 2 UFOs that were coming down in that area, coming down and going up. And I thought they were just going by and passing the moon. But it shows that there was terrain behind there. And so we have even more mysteries. But some good NASA guy was told to clip the film, and he clipped the film as he was ordered. But thank God, he left us 2 frames so that we can really see that clear picture of the moon racer.
Yeah, I love that thing. That is really, really odd. Well, hey, man, this has been a great talk. I really enjoyed you coming on here. Before we go, I wanted to ask you one completely unrelated question. because I've heard
Sure.
you talk about the Chupacabra before, and that it's
Yes.
because that's near my area. I'm here in San Diego, and I've heard you say that it's actually an intelligent race of some kind, maybe extraterrestrial, superior to
Yeah.
humans in
Yeah,
intelligence.
yeah, it's intelligent. I see. I went to Puerto Rico in 1978, and I had some very unusual experiences down there. And I started to latch onto this chupacabra mystery. And over the years, I've had a lot of experience with this phenomenon, and I've come to the conclusion that the chupacabra is actually analogous to the gray extraterrestrials' hunting dog. But
Wow.
imagine a hunting dog that is telepathic and more intelligent than a human, and telepathic on a psychic level, and to such a degree that it can read the person's belief system and then project a thought and convince the person that either they're having a dream or they're having a hallucination, or they can actually shapeshift into something else. But the three puncture wounds in the side of the animals, the method of extracting the tissues that it needs, it convinces me that this creature is very stealthy, and it attacks what it needs, and then it takes back what it got to its masters. And that's my take on Chupacabra.
Wow. That's
I can tell you
interesting.
more privately. I can tell you more about this privately when we're off the air,
Yeah.
because too disturbing to many people to hear what I've got to say. I do believe that they are also involved in the abduction of human beings. That they're the short little creatures that are sent in,
Mm-hmm.
carry people away. And
Wow.
if you want to do a show on that subject, abductions, and what the purpose and the reason is, and why the government fears it so much, we can do
Yes.
that another time.
We definitely should. Yeah, this has been awesome, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference, man. I mean, hopefully we can do it again sometime for sure. I know there's a ton of meat left on these bones, but
Oh, yeah.
once again, for the people, we will both be at the Secret Space Program and Breakaway Civilization Conference in a little over a week from now. It's going to be the next weekend, the 28th and 29th in San Mateo, California. I'm going to be selling conspiracies at my booth. Robert's going to be dropping knowledge on the main stage. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the people with before we call it in?
Let's see. Yes, I would like everyone who enjoys this subject to remember that we have to have sound minds and sound bodies, and I want to promote the idea of adopting Frisbee, especially the versions of Frisbee that I've developed called Martian double disc Frisbee, as the official sport of ufologists. And so I'll be bringing my discs to California, and Greg, I hope you play Frisbee, because
I love Frisbee golf, so I'm in.
Okay, well, I teach and practice a martial art, Tai Chi form of Frisbee, and we take two Frisbees and put them one inside the other nested. We throw the Frisbee as one. As it flies, it splits into two, and you have to catch the two, either one with each hand, or, as I've learned to do, two or three with one hand.
Wow, that
I
sounds
hold
like
the
fun, man.
I hold the world records for triple Frisbees. We have three Frisbees that fit into each other. We sling them and they sail, and you have to make instantaneous decisions in pattern, interception, trajectories to be able to catch three. Two, one in each hand, and then the third one with one or the other hand. But I got the skill level high enough a few years ago to have caught 12 triples with one hand, 134 triples in 1 hour. And I do like to emphasize the importance of physicality. You see, so many people are walking around, as I call them, brains with legs.
Yeah.
And we are humans, and the human body is what defines us as humans.
Well, we've been trying to catch flying saucers for years, so I think that's a perfect game for ufologists.
Okay, so Greg, I'll look forward to playing some disc with you when I get out to California.
Absolutely. Robert, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. Stop by the Conspiracies booth and say hello if you get the chance, and we'll go out there to the quad and we'll throw some Frisbees.
I certainly will.
All right, man. You have a good one.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
There it is, people. There it is. I hope to see some of you next weekend at the Secret Space Program Conference, and we'll play some Frisbee with Rob, smoke a lot of weed, and listen to some sick-ass presentations. Join in on the Money Bomb, and next week we'll have 2 winners and a phenomenal conversation with John Perkins, author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and a major player in the movie Zeitgeist Addendum. It is not one to miss. Thanks for listening. I love you guys. Take care of yourself. I'll see you out there when I see you. That's it for me. Your move, NASA.